All right, we are live.
All
Hey,
right.
Nathan, how's it going? Hey, everybody. Welcome to the first review of Shark Week 2016, Discovery Channel's annual week of sharks, where they try to spread the good message of sharks. And in the past, they haven't. But this year, they're going to try harder, and we're going to see if they're going to do well, if they're actually going to spread conservation, spread some cool, interesting facts of sharks during this wonderful Shark Week, and we'll just kind of follow it and try and review as many shows. I am here with Nathan Johnson. Nathan, how you doing?
Doing well. I like your week of sharks better than Shark Week.
Isn't it better? Week of Sharks, right? Shark Week
Week of
sounds so
Sharks.
aggressive.
Call it Weeko Sharks for our UK neighbors.
There you go. Right on. They've been busy with other stuff this week. Yeah, so anyway, for those of you who don't know us, Nathan and I, we co-host a podcast, at speakupforblue.com. The podcast is actually called the Speak Up for Blue podcast. And essentially what we do is we try and spread the message of ocean conservation through education, raising awareness. We talk about cool facts. The way the podcast works is we post 3 times a week. Nathan joins on Friday, where we do an Ocean Talk Friday, where we take 4 episodes or 4 articles, really, and we discuss them, and then we describe them, give our opinions on it. We have a good time doing that. On Mondays and Mondays, I discuss usually a key issue or something that happened over the weekend or something in the news, or an issue that I've wanted to talk about and describe for a while that's maybe getting a little like some debunking of myths, or people are not really getting the issue straight, and just try and straighten it out and provide you with the right information. And then on Wednesdays, we try and have a guest every Wednesday to talk about their projects and really promote what they're doing in ocean conservation, because there are a lot of people in the world who are doing fantastic work in ocean conservation. So we try and do our best to kind of give that, to them. So that's what we do here in that's the Speak Up for Blue podcast. And this week, essentially what we're going to do is we're going to provide you with as much information on Shark Week that we can do. So today we're going to review the first episode, the 8 o'clock episode of Shark Week, which was Tiger Beach, which documented Dr. Neil Hammerschlag's lab at the University of Miami Residential School of Marine Conservation, where they go out and they went to this place on the Bahamas called Tiger Beach. And they essentially want to find out the key question of why are there so many tiger sharks at Tiger Beach? And I think it's kind of an interesting question. It's taking that, Shark Week is now taking that research aspect and really kind of saying, hey, this is what we're trying to do. And Shark Week is providing some really cool documentation, video, some effects that really enhance the scientific process, which is what we want to see in Shark Week. So I think that's a fantastic way. And Nathan, my understanding is you weren't able to watch Shark Week, were you?
No, here's the thing. I Googled how to watch Shark Week, and then I realized that was a poor Google choice. So then I Googled how to stream Shark Week, because I don't have cable, I don't have a TV here. But I thought, I know from what I understand, they're streaming it afterwards. Like you could watch full episodes, I think.
On the website?
After they air, I would think you could. Maybe you can't. But I was trying to do it online, and so they say if you have a cable account, which I have access to a cable account, you can just find your provider, type in your name, and then stream it.
Right.
You basically watch live TV on Discovery's website. So I went there, and the one cable provider that they do not have is Comcast, which at least in the US is like 90% of people's cable provider, and personally has been like 75% of my frustrations with anything over the last year. But I don't even think I can blame Comcast for this.
No, well, it seems like it's more of a cable, like Discovery Channel kind of thing, right?
Yeah, and that just to me seemed really weird. So I was able to watch some clips, 2 to 3 minute. There are about 3 or 4 of them that they posted from Tiger Beach. So I got a decent idea of what it was, but we're talking like 15 minutes of the entire episode, and I feel like I'm back in high school having to study for a test for a paper or a book that I never read.
Using the Cold Notes version, right?
Yeah, using like Cliff Notes and like 2-minute summaries from my friends.
Well, we'll give you the synopsis. I'll try and give you the synopsis so that you can kind of tell. But you have some history. You've heard we had Dr. Neil Hammershlag on the podcast actually
Yeah,
during
one of our
last
first
year's.
episodes.
Yeah, during last week's Shark Week, we had it for one of our episodes. He was on doing an interview. And if you guys want to get that interview, it's www.speakupforblue.com. Shark Week 2, all one word, no dashes. It's just Shark Week 2. We'll post a link in the description once this episode goes recorded or whatever. This is the first time we actually do a YouTube live. So this is going to be a real big test. I haven't tested
We don't know
before.
what we're doing.
We have no idea what we're doing, and it took me about a half an hour to figure it out. They had me download encoders, and so I've just kind of been flying by the seat of my pants. And then it said, "Oh, if you want to start now, just click here," and it worked through a Google Hangout. So we'll see how the recorded version looks, and we'll see how it's going to display on YouTube. But we'll put all these links in the description of what you guys can see, the resources that we could provide you guys to sort of enhance your Shark Week information on sharks, really. Just enhance your experience with Shark Week, because this is a valuable time. At the beginning of this week, a lot of scientists, a lot of conservationists are prepping. We're trying to provide more information than Shark Week will provide, because they do a good job. In the past, maybe 10 years ago, they did a really good job. They kind of went up and down. Then they went down for about 5 years. And then the last year, they kind of mixed it up a little bit, provided a little bit more science. They got a new president, which is really exciting. He wanted to go back to more science-based activities, and none of this sort of mockumentary type programs where you're talking about a megalodon and it doesn't even exist, but you're saying it does, and you have actors as government scientists that are providing this kind of stuff. And to be honest, it's bull. We just don't want to see that happen. So what we try and do is we take these weeks, and if they have great programming, that's awesome, and we try and build on that. So for instance, Neil does research not only on tiger sharks, but he does research on a lot of other sharks. Hammerheads is what we talked about mostly on the Speak Up for Blue podcast last year. He does work on ocean white tips. He does work on tiger sharks. I think he's actually on in another episode this week, and I'm not sure, but I think it deals with great whites. Don't quote me on that. I'm not too sure, or maybe even ocean white tips, because I know he's done a lot of research on that. But essentially, what he does is his research lab tags sharks, and they try and tag sharks for the purpose of figuring out where they go and answer the question, why do they go where they go? And it's amazing when I talk to him, realizing that we don't really understand that much about sharks. And I was going over some podcasts that we've done all year with shark researchers, and Chris Lowe, actually, I've got a clip that I'll post on the YouTube channel, but Chris Lowe from University of California was like, yeah, not only do we not know anything, we just don't know much about them, and people are taking old information that are more anecdotal, and that's becoming sort of the message, the overall science message for conservation. So it's kind of weird that people are doing that when we don't know much information. The data doesn't support it. And now that we have more data, we're getting more researchers that are tagging sharks. We're finding out that there are actually more sharks. They actually have a very big range in migration, and they actually have a pattern that they follow. And I think this is what they're out to do right now. This his lab is out to just tag as many sharks as they can and find out where they go. Doing two different types of tags, satellite tags and acoustic tags, and they both provide different information from different sources. So it's kind of an interesting premise, this whole shark tagging and just gathering data, and the fact that these sharks are the basis of most people's fear of the ocean, and we don't really know much about them. And a lot of people, you see a lot of governments, you see a lot of management, the way we manage sharks when there is a shark attack, how we go out and we just kill all the large sharks, and we don't think that it has an effect on the habitat, as they are an apex predator, and they rule the ocean, and they sort of maintain their prey populations at a certain level that make it healthy for the actual habitats around them, coral reefs, seagrasses, mangroves, and it's very important from an ecological standpoint and from a biodiversity standpoint to keep these habitats stable so that we can keep doing what we want to do in the ocean and not change anything to something that we don't know what's going to happen. which is actually happening right now with all the killing of all the sharks. So Shark Week plays a very important role in this, and Dr. Neil Hammerschlag's lab takes an even better role in just saying that data matters, and we need to get more and more data, and that's what they do. Do you have any thoughts on that, Nathan?
No, I think I agree in that Shark Week kind of has a unique following. It's a unique opportunity to, I think, highlight a lot of this research, and not just related to sharks in general, but any type of specifically marine science, because that's one that's gotten a lot of funding cut over the years. And I think the opportunity to highlight these scientists and just show like the incredible work that they're doing and the important questions that they're trying to answer is really important. But to do it in an entertaining way that can captivate people that otherwise might not be interested in this type of research. If you have the option of reading one of Neil's peer-reviewed papers or seeing an episode of him on Shark Week, most people would probably prefer to see him on Shark Week.
Right.
But that's an avenue for him to translate this research out there to the people who ultimately fund a lot of this type of science. So I think it's a really good opportunity. It's a lot of responsibility on Shark Week's part, which we've talked about in the past. But and then when you get specifically into sharks, you're right. We know a lot less about them than people would think, because they're such a big, basically an icon these days for the public, for entertainment, for anyone who talks about the ocean. That you would think we know pretty much everything there is to know about sharks based on how much the media brings them up. But in reality, we don't know that much. And it's important that we start to learn even basic things, like you said, their movements, their migrations based on the seasons, their mating behaviors, their nursery grounds, because a lot of them are endangered, a lot of them are threatened. So without this information, we can't adequately protect them. So while it's important to know any of this type of information for a lot of different animals, for ones that have this much pressure put on them, especially by humans, I think it's even more urgent.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing, right? There's so many misconceptions about sharks, and most of them they're killers. And to be honest, Shark Week has, not only with the movie and other movies have actually kind of put that in. Yeah, they put it into the back of our heads where all these sharks do is bite and they're mindless killers, and they like humans and they're serial killers and things like that. I mean, even one of the Shark Week shows that actually are showing again this year is their portrayal of a potential great white that is a serial killer along the California coast, which doesn't make sense. There's no scientific evidence that backs that up. It's just more of a story people could follow of like basically a horror story, but it instills fear into our minds because we don't know much about the California great white shark population. Yeah,
and it's basically the modern day equivalent of Moby Dick.
Yeah, absolutely. Which
is it's a great story, but like it's a ridiculous fiction story from hundreds of years ago.
Right, but the thing is too, there's a lot of consequences to these great whites. There's potential consequences to these great whites, and that's the same thing over at tiger sharks. Tiger sharks have a very mean reputation just because of the way they're built. The size, they can get up to a maximum of 20 feet. They're huge. They have like 4 foot wide face they were talking about or head, and they were talking about in the show, and they're a big shark, and they have razor sharp teeth, like surgically razor sharp teeth. So they said, other than the great whites, tiger sharks have been attributed to the most sort of killings of humans in the history. So whether that's a fact or not, I'm not sure. This is what they were saying in the episode, but it's very interesting. I love to see the fact that Shark Week is covering a lab like Hammershlag Lab, because this is just great information to find. And actually, you can see a lot of these tags. If you go to sharktagging.com, audience, you can actually see where these tags are. Mm-hmm. And if there's other organizations that are doing very similar things, Ocean Arc or Arch, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. We'll put the links in there of you can actually look, and they profile each individual. They take a picture, they kind of give a name, and they profile the shark, so you can kind of romanticize it a little bit and see where this shark is going and whatnot. But Anyway, enough of our sort of overall statements of Shark Week. Let's talk. I'm going to talk to you about the Tiger Beach episode. I was looking forward to this. I actually got nervous before this episode because I interviewed Neil before. I got to know him. I've actually been out with this lab to tag some sharks at a field trip in one of the conferences I went to. Unfortunately, we actually didn't find any sharks, but it was really cool to hear the process of what they go through. And now to actually see it in a sort of HD discovery kind of way was really cool, and to see how actually, intense this process is to get a shark up on board, especially with the size of the sharks that they were showing in this episode. But essentially, what this show is all about is documenting a trip that Hammerslag's lab took to Tiger Beach in the Bahamas. It's a popular beach that was discovered by this captain that was actually captain of the ship that they were on, and he discovered it, called it Tiger Beach, because he couldn't believe how many tiger sharks were around. So Neil Hammershlag went over there with his lab and said, okay, well, let's try and answer the question of why are there so many tiger sharks there? Is this a feeding area? Is this a spawning area? Is this a gestation area? Is this a birthing area, a pupping area? So we don't know why these animals are there. What they wanted to do is they wanted to tag as many sharks as they could, find out when they tag, there's all these things that they do to the shark or measure for the shark and get all these different parameters to figure out what they're like, what they're doing, what stage of life they're in, and then they release them, and then they tag them, and then they find them again and find out where they're from, or where they go and what they do. And so it's kind of interesting how they do stuff. So they catch and tag the sharks. When they catch them, they put them up on this platform that's on the back of the boat, and they sit on top of it. They put a pipe that has streaming water through into the mouth so that there's high oxygenated water going through the gills to keep the shark calm, making sure it's saying, look, I'm still in the underwater, we're okay. And they take a bunch of measurements. So they take the total length, they take width, they take weight if possible, or they estimate weight. They take a little snippet of the back part of their dorsal fin, which actually, when I was on the ship to do the tagging, they said it actually doesn't hurt because there are no veins that go there or no nerves that are in that little piece. So they just take a little piece of that and they do some DNA testing to find out health and so forth. Then they take blood. They do more measurements, and then what was kind of cool is during the episode they brought another researcher on from New England, and he actually took ultrasound of the heart and of the stomach area to find out if it's a female, if it's pregnant. And there's some pretty cool things that they discover in that show, which we'll talk about in a sec. But so they take all these measurements, they don't harm the shark, and when they release the shark, they literally just watch it go away. And what I notice about the process is that they put 2 divers in the water when the shark is up on the platform, and they let it. They kind of, when they let it go, those 2 divers are still in the water. The shark doesn't go after the divers. It just kind of goes off on its own, and a lot of them are leaving calmly. They're not hurt, and they go along. The other thing they do on the platform, I forgot to mention, is they look at their teeth, making sure nothing's infected. Look at the overall health of the shark to kind of and document that, just to see what that population is like, or that individual, and to see if there are more that are either healthy or non-healthy, to kind of judge what that population what it's like in that area. So a lot of things that go on in there, and there have been some controversies with the tagging process. So they either put an acoustic or satellite or both tag on the shark. And that's where the controversy comes in. But before I go in that, do you want to go through what the tags are, like the acoustic and satellite tags?
Yeah, so the acoustics, are those acoustic telemetry tags?
Yeah.
Yeah, so those, they basically give out pings throughout the water. And when you tag the shark or any type of fish with these tags, they'll ping every set amount of time, or when they pass a receiver, if you use receivers in the area, and you can pinpoint that specific ping with a location for that individual tag. So you can get an idea of roughly its direction, its general movements over the course of, I don't know, how long do those tags usually last? Do they pop off?
No, well, it depends on how they're added on. Yeah, sometimes they'll come off naturally,
Okay.
and sometimes they're designed to pop off. It really depends. The ones that I've been used to seeing are actually in freshwater fish, and they
Yeah.
actually surgically implant them in there.
Yeah, those are the ones I'm familiar with too.
Yeah. But I think with these sharks, I think they're actually put on the dorsal fin.
Right.
And they will eventually come off over time.
Yeah. So that's the acoustic tags. Satellite tags, from my understanding, are a little bit more fancy and more expensive, but they record a variety, in addition to location, which they just use from a satellite, hence the name. They can potentially record a bunch of other data, like temperature, depth. I think you can infer, if not measure directly.
Mm-hmm.
There are some that I think can measure velocity, so you can get an idea of, based on velocity or swimming speed, you can get an idea of like basic behavior, like if they're diving, if they're hunting, that sort of thing. Let me see what else. I mean, you could get a lot of other water quality parameters, I'm sure, with certain types of satellite tags, but I know those are sort of the preferred use of a lot of, especially large marine animal or marine mammal researchers. Obviously, the downside is they're expensive. And so, you know, if you put them on and they pop off too early, or you put them on and something goes wrong and they don't collect data, you basically just wasted a few $1,000s. But the satellite tags are incredible, not just for sharks, but, you know, like I said, whales, other marine mammals, seals, sea lions, just because of the amount of data you can get naturally from animals that otherwise you wouldn't be able to collect that data from.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. And you know, one thing too I should mention is that when you look at the differences between the two, is the satellite tags go for longer distances.
Right.
And every time the animal will pop up to the surface, you will get a ping to the satellite, and then it'll go down, and then whatever, you know, recorded. There are certain satellite tags, my understanding, that are configured differently, and they can gather different water quality information. But with the telemetry tags, the acoustic tags, those are actually pinged when it passes a receiver, and usually that's done underwater. So the sharks don't necessarily have to pop up to the top; they can just go to the bottom. So with this episode, they used a variety of two. Sometimes they put both. I know they put one on where they actually found a pregnant female. So they put the acoustic and the satellite tag on, just in case this shark went beyond the receiver sort of setup and went beyond that. So they wanted to track where it went. But because it was really important, because they want to know where it's gonna, you know, pop and stuff like that. So they actually found that. But it's kind of interesting because, you know, satellite tags are much more expensive. They're being used a lot more now. They're kind of coming down in price, but I think researchers are realizing that these satellite tags are a lot more useful in terms of long distances, with especially long migrations. But the acoustic ones are used more often still because they're cheaper. And actually, I was told in Florida, there's actually a good array of receivers that are already out there from other researchers. So there's a big network of that. And I don't know if it's, you know, all throughout the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea, or even if there's more that go further into the Gulf of Mexico.
Well, with acoustics, that's normally one of the barriers, I guess, to using it. Is sometimes, I mean, if you have to go out and physically plant new receivers, that's kind of a whole issue in itself. But like you said, if other researchers have done this, or these receivers are already out there, then you have these acoustic tags, which are cheaper, can get you basic movement data, which if that's all you need, you're golden.
Exactly. And what's interesting is part of the episode, right at the beginning of the episode, when they were talking about these acoustic tags and how they were tagging them, they took through the process, and some of these sharks that they were getting were a good 10 to 12 feet, and they were big. They were some big sharks, and to bring them in, one of my criticisms I have, not about the actual show, and it's a bit of a safety issue because I'm so concerned with safety, is that when they're on the back of the platform and they're essentially reeling in the shark with a line, and they have gloves on, and they're just kind of pulling it in by hand, and there's a bunch of them. There's probably about 4 in a line, but there are no life jackets on. These researchers had no sign of life jackets. I don't know if they're wearing some sort of, you know, personal flotation device that activates when they go in, and maybe they're maybe too bulky to use when they're in that close to the shark or something, but none of them have it on. And at one point during the show, one of the girls that was doing it went in the water. She held on a little too long as the shark goes out, because the shark coming in and out, depending on how the boat was moving, depending on how the wave action. It sort of got rough at some point, and then you got the tugging of this 12-foot, 10, 12-foot sharks who are very, very strong. Some of them fell in, some of them were very close to falling in a couple of times, and it gets a little dangerous. And the way I see it is, if like one of them falls, hits their head, goes in the water, you're in there with a pretty angry shark. Not that it's going to bite or anything, but it could hit them. Hit them on the head. They can be knocked out, and they don't have a life jacket, and somebody has to go in and save them. Now, there are safety divers in the water, and there are people all around, but you never know, right? You never know what might happen. And I don't understand why they don't really have life jackets. I'm hoping that there is some kind of safety protocol with that, but that kind of concerns me a little bit, especially with the intensity of bringing in some of these bigger sharks. But it's really cool the way they do things, and they kind of let the shark go. But anyway, they were at this point of the show, they were talking about the catch and release. Then they started to say, okay, now we got acoustic tags. At one point, they went down. Neil and the captain went down to scuba diving into these sort of tiger shark infested waters, and were cleaning off one of the receivers, because you have to maintain the receiver. Now, sometimes people will maintain them by pulling them up on the line and bringing them on the boat and doing. That's how we do it with our research group. But some of them, I guess these guys decided, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to keep them in the same spot, and we're going to dive and go in and clean them. Excuse me. And it was interesting, the fact that when they did that, they got swarmed by all these the tiger sharks. And these tiger sharks were coming at them. And this is where, I don't know if it was like Shark Week or Discovery trying to sensationalize how dangerous it is, but you see there was the cameraman that was the diver, you see Neil that was the diver, and then the captain was acting as the safety diver for both divers. So the safety diver, the cameraman was probably about maybe 4 feet away from what it looked like from Neil and the safety diver, and the safety diver kept going back and forth at one point between the two divers, warning them of, hey, there's a shark behind you. Oh, there's a shark coming up on your right. Oh, and they would come in so close that they would have to put their hands on their snout and push them off. And all the time, actually, they were able to push them off. And sometimes when they pushed them off, their mouths would open. But I think that was just the fact that they actually pushed them off. But it was intense. And there were probably, I think they mentioned there was 9 sharks, good-sized sharks that were all around them, kind of coming in, being curious, running into the camera. When they ran into the camera, they kind of bit the camera. When they ran into the receiver, you see them kind of like do almost like a discovery bite and then go off. And it was pretty intense. They actually did a commercial break because of it, to build up that intensity. And then but it was funny. So they try and sensationalize it on TV. But when they come out of the water, the divers come out of the water, they're like, "How was it?" And you think, "Oh my God, that was the scariest thing in my life." They're all like, "That was awesome. We got to see them up close and personal, and none of them felt in danger." Like, they left eventually because they said, no, it's getting a little too hairy down here. But when they got up on the ship, they were like, this is actually all right. Like, this is actually, that was one of the most intense times we've been down there. It was fun. Nothing happened. They were very curious. They came up close, and there were a lot of them, but that was pretty awesome. And that's where the difference, I think, between the last couple of years and this year, where you're really seeing these true researchers, true people who not only want to discover the data or collect the data and sort of discover new things, but you see how excited they are to be around these animals.
Yeah,
and that's the research part of it.
I think Neil even specifically said after the dive, he was like, "Hey, they didn't care about us being down there at all."
It's exactly.
They were literally just like, swimming through it the same way that, like, you might drive a bumper car down a bumper car alley. Like, you're gonna run into other stuff, but you don't really care they're there. You're not trying to go after them. Actually, that's a bad analogy, because bumper cars you kind of are. But anyway, yeah.
No, but you're right.
He was very much like, no, they weren't trying to come after us. They were just swimming through.
That's exactly what it was, and they were swimming through sort of their area, and it looked, the divers were being cautious of what was happening around them, and I think that's just part of being, diving with sharks. And they had the masks on, so maybe the sound coming out of their masks sounded a little more hectic than it actually was, or maybe it was, but they were just being safe. But it was really cool to see how they were just like, when they got out, they're like, that was awesome.
Yeah.
We had so much fun, and we're going to gather so much more data. And then they went right into the data, and they started showing some of the pings on like a map. And I think they were doing some sort of like, it was kind of cool effects from a TV perspective. But it was really kind of cool how they did that.
Yeah. No, I think going back to the whole, I mean, you got to be safe, obviously, when you're diving with sharks. I don't think we want to give off the impression that there's nothing to worry about. Obviously,
Right.
anytime you're scuba diving, you got to be safe, but with sharks especially. But if you can put your hand on a shark's nose to push it away, like, do you really think it's trying to go after you? If it wanted to get you, a good stiff arm's not it. And I think so. They were looking at, if I remember correctly, I guess one of the questions they're trying to ask is if the like boat tours in the area, I guess they toss chum into the water, and so maybe that could be what's attracting sharks to those areas.
Yeah, that was one of the questions. So there's a big ecotourism industry along Tiger Beach,
Right.
which is all about you take divers in, you have a box of chum that sits in the middle, and all the divers kind of sit in a circle or in a line very close together, and these tiger sharks come in, they bite the bait box, and then you get to see these tigers. They kind of swim around you, they swim through you, and you kind of get to see this area. And so far, knock on wood, there hasn't been any kind of accident. It's been kind of a cool experience for a lot of divers. And so one of the questions is the chumming of the food inhibiting sort of their natural movements?
Mm-hmm.
And so essentially, I guess what they're looking at is through the tags is it just they're only around are the sharks only hanging around where the divers hang around? And that's basically because of the chum box. Or are they just kind of going there, and then when the chum with the bite box was done or the divers leave, they kind of spread out and they go away? And that's exactly what they discovered. Where they discovered that the divers would show up, they have that bait box, the sharks would go near the bait box, but once the divers left to go up, the sharks were gone. They would go off and do their own thing after a while, and then when the tourism came back, boom, they would do the same thing, and then they would go back again. So that question got answered saying, well, they're not here just because of the dive tourism, which is one of the big questions that scientists had. They said, when this ecotourism started, and they're like, well, this is dangerous. Tiger sharks are just going to come here. It's going to impede their natural migration, their natural habitat routes, and where they actually are because of food, and they only want to hang around for food. And that question got answered basically, and it was the opposite of what people thought, which is great. That's what scientific information is all about, right? That's why they do the research.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool. The other question they asked was, is it a feeding area for sharks? Are they here to feed? And so what they did is they looked around, looked at their major food sources. One of them were sea turtles. Mm-hmm. They noticed that there weren't many sea turtles around. And they said, well, it's probably a dangerous area for sea turtles if there's so many tiger sharks around, because tiger sharks have teeth that essentially can just crush through a sea turtle shell with almost one bite, because they're so surgically sharp. So they noticed a couple that they found, but they didn't notice a lot. So they're saying, well, there's not enough here to feed this amount of population, the amount of individuals that are gathering here. So why is it that they're here? So they noticed those. So it wasn't because of the ecotourism industry. It wasn't because of a feeding area. So what was it? And what I liked about this episode is they followed that storyline the entire time. It's like, why are they here? And then they would come up with these little sort of sub-stories, like they would start off with, this is how they tag, and showing the intensity of the tags and what information they provide. Then they said, okay, here is how they clean out a receiver and what happened when they clean out a receiver. And then, okay, so now let's look at some of the movements once they got these things tagged and where they're going, and are they congregating certain areas for certain reasons. They debunked 2 questions, and that was good. And then they just kind of kept following the story. It's like, okay, well, if they're not here because of the ecotourism industry, or that's not being affected, they're not here because of feeding, what's the next kind of value? And that was when they showed the tagging of a pregnant female. And this, Nathan, it was amazing how they used this technology of ultrasound to detect the heartbeat, to find out what the heartbeat's like while they're being tagged and everything. Then they had they looked at whether the animal was pregnant. If it's a female, they looked at whether it was pregnant. Now, one that they got was about 12 foot long. There's the largest they've ever caught and tagged, and it was girthy. They mentioned it was wide. And when they brought it up, it took them a while to bring him up. They thought they lost her for a while. It took them a while to bring it up. This is actually the one where the scientist fell in. One of the girls fell in, and then so she came back out. She was fine, of course. But so the way they did it though is they have one girl. She's a graduate student. She's holding onto the laptop. The ultrasound is hooked up to the laptop, but it's also hooked up into these virtual reality glasses. So the researcher, and I forget his name, but he's a major researcher out of New England, and he put the glasses on, and so he can't see anything but this ultrasound that's in front of his eyes. He was kneeling on or beside a 12-foot tiger shark that weighs probably a ton, and he can't see anything but its heartbeat and the 20 pups, almost fully developed, 2/3 developed, that was in her stomach.
That's awesome.
That is so cool. Like, that's taking virtual reality and hitting a whole new level. Because usually with virtual reality, you're sitting on your couch and you're like on the Great Wall of China, or maybe you're diving with sharks and stuff like that, and that's pretty cool.
Well, and so this was projected on the laptop too, right?
It was being recorded and projected on the laptop.
So he didn't even need the glasses. They could still look. He was just like, well, we got the Discovery Channel budget. We need virtual reality in this project.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if it was Discovery that put that on or he uses that, and I don't know what the benefit of that is, but that's pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
And I was like, as I thought, I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. He's using virtual reality. Then I was like, oh, he's like beside a massive shark, and he can't see it. He can only touch it and feel the waves kind of crashing in. Because every once in a while, the shark would bring its head up, like fully, almost like a 90-degree angle, and then they'd have to kind of slowly push it down. And you hear them like, oh, here comes the head, here comes the head, here comes the head, and then you're pushing it down, and he's just like, oh, I see the babies, I see the babies. Like, you're just like, what? That's insane.
That guy's even a nerd within biologists.
I know. But what was kind of cool, and this is where the wonders of like Discovery comes in, is you see the ultrasound, and I'm not sure if you've ever seen an ultrasound, but it's still pretty faded. Like you can see the individual sharks, and it's pretty cool, but you can't really see a lot. You can see the teeth, you can see maybe an eye, a faded outline of the actual body, but you couldn't really see how many there were in the shot. And then so what Discovery did is they kind of animated each one into an actual shark. So they kind of outlined each one with an actual shark animation. And so you saw, like, in that shot there were 4, and they were moving around and stuff. And then they actually said there was 20 pups in the tiger shark belly. That's how big this shark was. And I was just like, holy cow, that is awesome. Like, I nerded out on that. I was like, this is great. So it's kind of, yes. So what they did is they satellite tagged her. They put an acoustic tag, and they put her back in the water. She went down nice and calmly, and it was awesome. And that was kind of cool. So it's kind of an interesting. I never thought they would use an ultrasound. They said what was interesting is that to know if a female was pregnant before, they would have to kill it and cut it open and find all the babies. Now they use ultrasound. They don't. It's not invasive. It doesn't hurt the shark at all. And it saves this 12-foot shark.
Right.
So for research purposes, this is a huge win, because I think what would happen is researchers wouldn't cut into a shark like that, that size.
Well, they wouldn't want to kill it if it wasn't already dead, basically.
Exactly. So so that was kind of one of the cool things in the episode. They're using virtual reality. They're using ultrasound. It's kind of cool in some of the way, they look at the heartbeats and they look at for mating protocols and stuff. And it was just like, wow, that is pretty cool. I like that stuff.
That ultrasound thing too is because I know they've used it for like vets and other when you actually have to look at the health of an animal. I know they've used it on animals before, but it's one of those ones that makes a lot of sense now that, like, we hear, oh yeah, they'll use it to look, as long as you can bring it in the field, you can see if the shark is pregnant. But it's kind of it's not really an intuitive leap to make if no one's done it before, to say like, oh, let's just bring out an ultrasound on board. So that's cool that some groups are starting to use that, because I'm sure there's no reason why it can't be used for other types of, not just sharks, but other types of similar large marine animals that would go through these types of pregnancies.
Absolutely.
Now,
I mean,
so one of the clips I watched, they talked about the mating scars on tiger sharks. So did they determine that this was between the pregnancy and the mating scars, that this was most likely the reason?
Yeah, it was interesting. They saw the scars, and they saw it on this actual shark, and they didn't really go into the full details. Now, obviously, we've seen sharks before, like video of sharks mating and how they do it, where the male essentially, or there's a number of males that are around one female. They're all biting them, and it was kind of interesting to see people on Twitter talk about it today, where they mentioned the mating scars, and to be like, oh, these sharks are like rapists, or this is great, this isn't going to teach anybody anything. Yeah, that's Twitter for you. But yeah, they started talking about it, so they started to look for those scars, and they started to see them on a number of females. And what they noticed, actually, there was a lot of females there at different life histories. They weren't all pregnant. Some were pregnant, some were young, some were at maturity, and some of them had eggs, but they weren't developed yet. So there were a lot of different females at life history, and some of them had the scarring and some of them didn't. So it was kind of interesting there. But they never actually went in. I don't think they actually found footage of mating itself.
Right.
But that kind of leads to the last part of the show, where this guy Joe Romero, who's like a shark researcher, he's been on Shark Week before. I forget what episodes but he's been on a number of times. But what he did, he's kind of a cameraman, right? And I think he's a bit of a researcher too. I don't know the details. I'll look him up, see if we can put some links. But he got this. It was like a fin clip, which is essentially, it was like this. It goes on it's a camera that's front facing and back facing. I think it's just two GoPros. And what he's done is he's made it to fit around a dorsal fin. So it basically it's on like two different. Let me just get to the camera here. It's kind of opens up in the middle, but it's straight, and then it's flexible. So you can kind of just open it up, and then you just plop it on the dorsal fin. You put it down to the base, and then now you have a camera. The design is it's supposed to pop off at a specific time, and then there's a GPS hooked up to it, and once it hits the surface, it starts pinging, I guess, satellites, and you can find it. So what they did is they put one on a shark. They were diving. They put one on one of the tiger sharks that came close by. It went, and they kind of showed it right away as it was kind of put on. Obviously edited, but it was really cool. You saw the front and the back, and then it popped off right away, and it went to the surface. So they were kind of like, oh, we hope that it actually stays on. Now, it was funny when they talked to Neil about this kind of technology. He was like, this would be really great to find out, not only find out where they go, but you get a first-hand view of how they're swimming,
right,
what they're looking at, and without any scientists around or a ship up above or anything like that. But he wasn't too confident on how that would go. Right? He wasn't too confident on how, will we be able to retrieve it? Will it work? How long will it stay on? And they weren't sure. So they put it on this shark. I think they called it Pickles. So it was a known shark in the ecotourism industry. So it was used to divers and stuff like that. Came around them. They plopped it on, and it stayed on for. Actually, they put it on when they tagged it. So they tagged it. They put it on, and then I think they acoustic tagged it, because when they put it on, he kind of left, or she kind of left, and then they looked for it. And there was a point they said they looked for hours and hours and hours. They couldn't find it. Like, oh God, are we going to get it back? How far off did she go? Where did she go? We don't know. So they gave up. Then later on the show, they found it. It popped up to the surface on the date that it was supposed to pop up. I don't know how many days it was supposed to be on, but it was a few days later. I think 4 or 5. They went to retrieve it, and they got it back. And you should have seen Neil, like, true to his scientific tendencies, he's like, I am so excited to get this. I want to look at it. I hope it worked, and this and that. And then they show him sitting with one of his researchers, and they're looking at the camera, and they see the tail, and they see the front, and you see the tail. Like it was interesting to see how the tail moves, and like it was swimming pretty fast, and you just see it whip and then whip and then whip back. And this is a 10-foot tiger shark. It's got a thick body, and the muscle on it must be amazing. and you see it moving through the currents, and then you see the front-facing one. You can switch to the front and back, or watch both of them at the same time, and you see these other sharks that come by it. Like, it goes underneath, it goes above, and like no aggression whatsoever towards it. Just kind of keeps swimming. They actually found the tag 10 miles away, or the fin, the dorsal fin thing, 10 miles away. So it actually swam a lot further than they expected within a few days. So it's kind of interesting to see that. And then so what they're going to look at is they're going to look at that information is going to give them sort of how they behave during their swim or during their migration at some point, or just a regular swim. So how the frequency of the tail moving, the fact that he mentioned that how it's moving very horizontally, so almost parallel to the ground, where they used to think that some of the fish would go up and down, up and down. So they were interested to see how that moved. They were interested to see the frequency of the tail whip, and how fast it would whip and how slow it would whip, or how steady it would be when it was swimming, when it was on a specific route. So it was a lot of information, and he says he can't wait to go through it. It was like days of information. So I can just imagine, I would hate to be the graduate student to have to go through that stuff for how many hours, 72 to.
They'll just give them virtual reality glasses.
Yeah, exactly. Just walk around campus, University of Miami campus.
That is a great adaptation of virtual reality technology. Once you get these cameras that can stay on the fins of sharks, give you like their perception, basically their point of view, put it on Universal Studios.
Yeah.
Put people in there, move around with them.
And imagine having now with the 360 technology that we have.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of those on Facebook. The videos where you have 360 technology underwater, and you're kind of moving around. You can look behind you and all over, and I think that's.
I think we just made a lot of money.
I think so. If we had the money to pay the people to do it.
I'm just based on royalties.
Oh, right, of course.
Intellectual property rights. It's how it goes, right? When you just blurb these things out on the internet.
Exactly. We get IP money, as I like to call it. IP.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, so that was most of the show, and a lot of what I like to see is they had a lot of information on how powerful these animals are and how great these animals are, how they behave. But what I also like to see is they talked a lot to Neil just about their conservation, how people react to them, how people are trying to kill them, or how important they are as an apex predator to the habitats, and how they keep the habitats stable with the way that they are the apex predator, and that how we just don't know a lot of information about them. And the more information, all these technologies that they were using, the fact that now they have access to them and they can use them more often, that will be incorporated more in their research, and they'll be able to find out not only about where they go, why they go there, but they'll know like how they react when they hit certain habitats, and I think that is a huge aspect for for conservation, for information, just data gathering about these sharks. So I think it's great to see this kind of stuff on Shark Week, right? And this message on Shark Week, and now the next episode after that, I didn't really watch a lot of it. Because I want to come on and do this, but I'll talk about it tomorrow at some point. Maybe I'll do another YouTube live during the day or something. But it looked more like, I think it was one of those air jaws kind of thing, and I don't know exactly what it was about. I think it's going to be okay, but it just looked a little weird. It was kind of interesting because before the show started at 8 my time, Eastern time, they had a sort of like a Shark Week preview an hour before that. And that was kind of interesting because all of their promos for Shark Week, the beginning and especially the end, was all of fear-based. It was all about like they showed clips of like the sharks biting each other. There's a video, and you've probably seen it online, of sharks coming in and grabbing and hitting the cage. And you're just like, oh God, here we go again. When I first started watching that, I'm like, this is Shark Week, this is Discovery, glorifying, the aggressiveness of sharks and instilling fear into people. But what was interesting about that is they would break it down. I just watched the first like 10 to 15 minutes of this episode. But what they did is they actually had on some really good, like some really well-known researchers and conservationists. One of the conservationists was from sharkangels.org, Julie Anderson, and she was talking, they would show like some of the videos that are coming out. One of them was that video of there are these guys, I think it's in South Africa, these guys are in a cage, and they're doing great white diving, and all of a sudden this great white comes out of nowhere and just torpedoes the cage. And you see that, and then they cut to Julie Anderson, and she was talking about, she's like, yeah, she's like, you really have to be careful when you go great white shark diving. There's some diver operators that do really well, where they show you the true as natural as possible of the great white sharks, like their behavior. And then others, what they'll do is they'll bait the sharks from far away and then start towing that line in. So you're almost making that shark go as fast as you can. Right. And what you're doing in that respect is you're potentially endangering the divers that are in the cage, but plus you're endangering the sharks who are running into that cage. Right? These sharks are tough and they're big, but when you're going full speed, like, they can get up to 20, 30 miles an hour, and they're going right into a cage, you're potentially endangering the animal. Teeth are going to fall out. It could cut itself. It could scar itself, and it's obviously that's not a good thing in the water. So, it was interesting though that how they had that researcher to talk about that right after, or the conservationists to say, hey, no, you got to be careful when you go to these dive operators. You got to make sure you get a good one, and you got to talk to them about their practices and talk to other people to get a good reference, so that more of these good dive operators get the business and can be more sustainable than these operators who are just fly by night, do whatever they can to put on a good show, and potentially put your divers or the shark in danger. So that was kind of cool to see, and they definitely talked about shark science and shark behavior in a better way than just mindless killing machines, which I liked. But then there was also some, it was like they couldn't get away from it. It was like an addiction. You see some of the clips, and you're just like, you see a paddleboard surfer who's on a wave, and he's going pretty fast, and the shark comes out of nowhere and hits him off, and he flies off, and the shark flies out of nowhere. But then you're like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And you don't know what's really going to happen to that guy because it's just a clip, but it makes it look like these sharks are like pinging people off surfboards to eat them. You know what I mean? Which is not the case. So, I think it's going to be interesting to see this week, like the actual the programming that they put on compared to their promos and what they want to do, how that's going to interact and how viewers are going to really see that. So that's something that we definitely have to watch, and if we don't like it, complain about it, because it looks like this Discovery Channel, this version of Discovery Channel, is listening because they're putting up more science-based programming.
Yeah, I think it was a good. It sounds like it was a good start with having Neil as the first sort of feature of Shark Week, because he's got a pretty solid reputation within the scientific community and within like the outreach environmental conservation community as well. He does a lot of scientific outreach and makes sure. I'd be surprised if he was like, if they twisted his words somehow, or if he was part of something that went against his research, went against the shark conservation message. But I still kind of think Discovery sounds like they're moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
But they are a TV network, and they do have a ways to go. So I think you're still going to see shows like that Great White Serial Killer episode, which I think is listed sometime to run this week. But hopefully, hopefully the overall message gets better and better. And it sounds like it will. It's not going to be, this Shark Week is going to be 100% devoted to just science and conservation. There's going to be air jaws, which are really harmful. You just see them every year.
Yeah.
And there's probably going to be some bite episodes about how people survive vicious shark attacks and potential serial killer sharks. But if you can at least water those down as much as possible, and then hopefully you see less of them next year, less the year after. At this point, I think that's kind of the best you can hope for.
Yeah, and actually, to Discovery Channel's sort of effort, I have to say this year's programming based on the schedule looks a lot more promising. And David Schiffman, he goes by the Twitter name at Why Sharks Matter. He did a bit of a review based on the schedule. He does that every year, and he only found one to be like avoid, which was the serial killer episode.
Right.
Yeah, there's air jaws. Actually, if I forget what it's specifically about, but it's about a feeding mechanism, like a specific feeding mechanism in the
Right.
shark, which I think is interesting. You know, when we found out great whites were ambush predators and they would attack from the bottom and they would jump out of the water, you know, an 18-foot shark jumping out of the water, that was amazing to find out.
Yeah.
You know, it's when they kept repeating those episodes every year to see the same thing happen. We kind of like, well, there's other sharks out there. What are they about? And last year when they profiled, like, I think it was like 5 or 6 different sharks and sort of their evolutionary ways of being a great predator, the way they survived as a great predator, that was kind of cool to see how a thresher shark used his tail to stun or hit out some schooling fish out of a school to eat it. Like, that was kind of an interesting aspect of it. And I think this air jaws, I have a feeling, I don't know if it's night air jaws or it has to do something predatory at night. It's kind of a cool thing. So that's cool. There are a couple that David recognized as a little bit iffy, you know, but it has some potential, and it all based on how they frame the dialogue and the story, the narrative. So that will be interesting to see on those. And what we'll do, either you and I or I will cover one of the episodes every night, and hopefully maybe one during the week, during the day, every day, and we'll see what we can do. I do go away on Thursday, so after that it'll be a little iffy if I can watch and try and figure out how that's going to work. But we'll try and get some at the beginning of the week so that we can give more, and then maybe next week I'll put out some more on some of the reviews that we can have a full set for Shark Week 2016. So yeah, so that's all for today. Nathan, thanks very much. I know.
Thanks for bringing me on, even though I wasn't able to watch it.
No worries, man. No worries. And hopefully, maybe you'll be able to watch some of the ones tomorrow. Maybe we can cover some of the ones that we showed tonight, and you can watch some of them tomorrow before we go live. And maybe I'll do an event this time and see how that works and try and schedule it to get some more viewers. So I think that'll be kind of cool. So, but thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I'm going to stop the broadcast right now, but we'll stay on the chat, all right?
All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I really appreciate it. And if you want to hear more, these will be on our podcast. They'll be on our YouTube channel. Our podcast, Speak Up for Blue, the Speak Up for Blue podcast, and you can just go to iTunes. You can subscribe, leave us a review. It'd be awesome, and that would be great, and we'll kind of continue with that. But we'll see you tomorrow night or even during the day tomorrow. I'm not too sure. I'll try and schedule some events and see how this YouTube Live works, depending on if this recorded and we can put it up. We'll have to see. But anyway, if not, we'll talk to you later, and thank you very much, and happy conservation.